you had an array and it's 1, 2, 3, and you have to mutate it, like for that reverse problem. If you try to mutate it in place, like R0 equals R2, then it's kind of very confusing. There's a lot of things you have to think about, because now if you do this, then the array will be 3, 2, 3. And so you've lost your 1. And so you have to keep track of that first element and some other variable if you wanted to do everything in place. Whereas it's a lot cleaner to just have like a new, like a placeholder array, and have that be an empty array, and then start adding to this array, and then just clear this array, like pop everything from this array, and then start pushing back into it, so that it's like.
That was one thing I had a question about.
Yeah.
You used a while loop.
Yeah, to start popping everything off.
Can you just, I guess, go over, because we don't use while loops as often, just the mechanics of what was going on there?
Yeah, I'll go over it.
Okay, cool.
But I just want to just point out kind of the approach for, even for my splice, they use the same approach.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's just like having this placeholder so that if you start trying to switch things in place here by using the index and then reassigning, then you have to, you know what I mean? Then you'll lose one of the values unless you keep the value in some other bookkeeping mechanism. And while that is doable, it's just a lot more, saves you a lot of thinking to just have this new array, just do everything to this array, and then because you don't want to switch indexes within the same array, it gets really complicated. Just clear this out using pop, and then you can't reassign it to a new array because then you're not mutating the original array. So you'd have to pop and just clear this array out, and then just start fresh, and then just start pushing into the same array, and you're still mutating it, the same array. You're not creating a new array, and so you still fulfill the requirements that it asks for. So let's just see an example of that. So here in my splice, I'll just do some pseudocode. So we have a function, and it takes an array, and it takes index to start deleting.
Why is it inside the describe?
Oh, that's a good catch. Index to start deleting, number to delete, and then item to add. So we have all these things. And so now we want to say, first, what do we want to do? Well, we want to keep everything up till this index, because this is where we start deleting. So everything, if this number was like 6, we want to keep everything from 1 to 5 or 0 to 5. So first thing we want to do is just create you guys saw the solutions already, and honestly, I also just looked at the solution because I was looking at this problem, and it's kind of a lot. It's involved. Like, there's a lot of things you have to maneuver around. So I'm going with a similar approach, but basically creating a new array that has all the elements that you want to keep, and then a new array that has all the elements that you want to erase. So first, just create an array of elements to keep, create an array of elements to delete, and then the first thing we want to do is add all the elements, or we can push all the elements from 0 to the index to start deleting into elements to keep. And then I know that this is pretty, it's not intuitive to think of a solution like this, but yeah, it's just it's it's kind of annoying because you have to keep the same array.
So do you need an empty array that you're pushing into?
You don't need to do that. You could try to do everything in place, but honestly, like I would not recommend that. Like trying to keep like having this array and trying to shift things around, like I would not recommend that. It's a lot of moving parts.
It wouldn't be.
I would just say create a new array. Just start fresh with a fresh palette.
But will that pass the test? If
Yeah.
You're pushing into an array with a different name than my splice.
Yeah, because you're eventually gonna push it back to the original array. It's just a placeholder.
And
Yeah.
One of the steps at the end is they cleared out the original array at the top and then replaced it with
Yeah, exactly. So we're gonna push all the elements from 0 to the index to start deleting into the elements to keep. And then we're gonna push the item to add if it exists. So we wanna also, if you see this example here, from 0 to 1, we push this because we want to keep this. So we push this into the elements to keep. And then there's apples. And so we're going to push apples too. So it's 1 apples. And then we're going to handle the erase starting from 1. So here we push all elements from index to start deleting. To index to start deleting plus num to delete, because we want to, if this was 2, we would go another one. If this was 3, we would go another one and delete those. But that's why I'm doing index. We start at 1 and we go until index to start deleting plus num to delete. And then because of this mutation requirement that we need to mutate the original array, I'm gonna pop all elements from original array and then push all the elements to keep into original array. And then I'm gonna return elements to delete.
And that was another thing I was confused about. Why do we need to return the elements to delete if our concern is that original array?
It's like my splice returns the element to delete. That's just like kind of what it does.
Oh, okay.
I know. And honestly, splice is something that we don't even use. We might not use frequently just because it mutates the array. But it's still important to know these concepts. So yeah. So then I'm just gonna, but it's also important to know, like at least for a complicated question like this, like never start trying to just code. Always try to put your process into English before you start coding, because once you start coding, it's pretty you could easily confuse yourself, and honestly, it's not trivial to solve a problem like this. So I would always make this type of approach. Obviously, if you, in the exam, if you see a problem and you can easily solve it, then don't do this. This is going to be a waste of your time. But let's say you're stuck on like one problem and you have like 15 minutes left and you've been kind of looking at it already, then it might make sense to do this. When you have 15 minutes left, the problem's hard, there's a lot of different moving parts, then it might make sense to do the pseudocode so that somebody could see it and at least know what you're trying to accomplish. And it makes coding easier too, because here you could just, you just follow step by step your instructions. So let elements to keep equal to an empty array, and then let elements to delete equals an empty array, or I'll just call this deleted elements, or not deleted, but removed is better. And so what am I going to do? I'm going to push all the elements from 0 to the index to start deleting, because that's what I need to conserve. So I'll say for until I is less than index to start deleting. and then I++. I'm just gonna push all of these into removed elements. So basically what this does is here, I'm pushing 1 into my elements to keep. Or, sorry. It's
Would it be less than or equal to index to start reading?
I'm not 100% sure, but I'm just going to go with this for now and then just log it and see. Like, I always get confused here. I think it starts at 0, and this is true, so it'll go in. I think this is right, because this is true. It'll go in once, and then and the second time it won't go in. Second time it'll be false. So we have 0, and what this does is this pushes 1 to elements to keep, because we're going to keep 1. Like, we're keeping 1 here because we're starting to delete from the index 1, so we're going to keep the 0th index. So that's what I'm first doing here. So
wait, so I'm a little confused. Why would your for loop start at 0?
Because we're trying to figure out how many to keep in our original array, and so we need to start from the first element, the 0th index, because where else would you start now?
Because I thought you were to create a splice, so normally the splice would start from the indicated.
Well, that's what we're returning, but we're trying to. That's why this problem is like there's a lot going on. Like this, you basically need to mutate your original array, to keep the original stuff up to 1. It needs to stay in the original array, and then you replace this element at this index, and then so you still need to keep your original element up to this index, and then what you're returning in your splice is going to be this, and so that's something else. Like that we'll handle down the line, but right now I'm just handling what I need to keep in the array.
Oh, right
in the
now
original
you're just
array.
worried about
I'm not worried about what I'm returning. Yeah, I'm not worried about what I'm removing yet. I'm just worried about the original array and keeping the original array, the elements I need to keep in the original array, to keep those.
Because you're trying to
Yeah.
build up the output array piece by piece. So before the first index number that you're working with, those numbers are still going to be part of the output array. So you have to kind of manually put them into this new array.
Yeah, I'm building this bottom part right now. Do you see if you splice my array, the return value is 2. Like what you remove out, what you cut out from the array, that's 2. But the original array needs to look like this. So I'm building my original array right now.
Oh, so you're not worried about what you're removing yet?
Not yet. Not yet.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So right now my array, my elements to keep is gonna look like 1 right now.
Cool. Question then.
Yeah.
Rather than making a for loop to generate the new array, couldn't you use .slice, since we couldn't use splice, but use .slice to make the copy of it and return the copy?
Yeah,
And
you can use .slice too.
Oh.
But that's if you're gonna .slice this,
Mm-hmm.
then under the hood it's still doing a for loop. Like you're not.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's still gonna do this. Like you're cutting. You could do instead of this, you could do elements to keep equals array dot slice 0 1.
Oh.
You could do that.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, right now elements to keep is 1, and then what's my next thing? So I'm pushing all elements from 0 to index starting into elements to keep. I did that. Now I need to push item to add if it exists. So now I need to push this into here. Like I need to make this part now, the apples. So does anybody have any ideas how I can do that? Like the next part of it? Like how I would code this? Push item to add if it exists.
Using the if statement.
Yep. And what should I put in here?
What did you call whatever the last variable is?
Item to add.
Items to add. Bang equal. So does not equal undefined. So this is defined value. You have value.
I would argue that's good. This would work, but I would argue you could just say if item to add.
If it's true.
Yeah, because it'll be truthy.
Yeah.
If it's not undefined, so it'll just save some code.
And you're
But yeah.
the same push function to the new array that you created.
Oh, that's a good catch actually. So yeah, this is actually necessary because if it was 0, it would be false and it wouldn't go in. Same with an empty string. So yeah, the undefined check is actually useful, and I actually wrote like in my that was something that I created a bug basically because I did the truthy check and then it was 0, but it should have still gone into the thing. So that actually happened to me like a few months ago. So I should definitely be more thorough with like being explicit. But yeah, that was like really, I was like trying to find that bug. It was hard to find. But yeah, so if it's undefined, then we push items to add. So now our elements to keep is going to be 1 apples. So it's looking we're looking good here.
I have another question.
Yeah.
Because when I look at splice or dot slice or whatever, I think of it as removing first before it returns. Is there a reasoning to the thought process of handling the return values before handling the removal values, the removal operation?
You could do it in any order. So what I'm about to do for the return, you could do that first. This is like arbitrary.
It doesn't really matter.
No.
Okay.
So I have 1 apples, and then push all elements from index start deleting to index start deleting plus num to delete. So that's push all elements from into. So we need to push it into the removed elements or array of elements to delete, because now we're going to the delete part. So does anybody have any idea how I would do that? Like how I would basically create this array from this array.
So you'd start at your
So like what
would you call it?
What should I start?
Like items to start deleting or whatever you call that.
Yeah.
File, or the variable.
Yeah, index to start deleting.
Index to start deleting.
So.
And then you would go to that value plus however many you're deleting.
Yeah.
The information.
Go to with what? Like what should my code be here? Like.
So it would be another for loop.
Yep.
I equals whatever that starting value that you named it. Yes, that's where we're starting. Because you've replaced that value with the string you put in, so it has to get deleted.
Yep.
And then it would have to be less than that plus however many elements you're deleting. And then you just do I plus plus, right?
Mm-hmm. And then here, which array should I add it to? Yeah. So removed elements. So we have that. And so now our elements or removed elements is going to be, what will it be for this example?
Number 2.
Yep. So right now we have 1 apples and we have 2. So we're like really close. So like we have 2, we have 1 apples. And so now I missed 1 step. So now we would push all remaining elements from, like, what should we push from now? Like I have 1 apples and I have 2.
So you start where you left off.
Yeah.
So that whatever was after the I is less than in your last loop.
Okay. So like this one, and then what should I go until?
I guess the length of the
Yeah.
original array.
Yeah. Two elements to keep. Okay, so now I'm just gonna say for let I equals this, because I'm starting where I left off, and then I is less than array dot length, and then I plus plus. I'm gonna push the remaining stuff into elements to keep dot push. And again, this is a lot, but it's good to, some things to take away is to try and, for a complicated problem like this, try and write pseudocode. And if there's anything where you need to rearrange elements in an array, it helps to just create new arrays. And then we're going to get to how we're going to mutate the original array right now. But so here now we have elements to keep should be 1 apples and what should the last one be? Yeah. 3. So we're good now. But the problem is that this, so we created 2 new arrays, right? But like splice is supposed to mutate the original array. That's the problem right now that we have. So we have everything that we want, but the annoying part is we have to make sure that the original array gets mutated. And so how we would do that is, now it's pretty simple. Like you have, I mean, it's not simple, but you have this array, and then your original array is, it's still 1, 2, 3 because we didn't push or pop to any of our original array stuff. So how would we replace this array with this array? Huh? So if you reassigned it,
Like to the elements to keep.
you mean like OG array equals elements to keep?
You're saying like a question, so I think it's wrong.
Huh? Yeah, like it's a good idea, but if you did this, and I like where you're going here because it's the simplest thing. Like it's the least amount of work to do. You just assign it, but then that means that the original array, which was, let's say it was pointing at memory address 1, now it's pointing at memory address 2 because this elements to keep, I instantiated it as an entirely new array up here. So they're not the same, they don't point at the same place in memory anymore. So OG array is now different. You're pointing it to a different address. It's pointing at address 2. And so that's why the test will break because they're not the same array. Yeah, because you reassigned it to a different address. Are there any other ideas about how I could make this element, like copy this over to here?
I was thinking like our array equals and dot something like how you use to copy it, but
But we're not trying to make a copy right now. We're trying to keep this the same array. And so what you would do is a lot of push and pop, those mutate the array. So if you just pop everything off of this array, then now this array is empty. And then you can just go through this array and then just push each element into this array and you've mutated it.
So like another for loop.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, could you show us how to deal with a for loop? Because I think the example used a while loop, and like personally, I originally had a for loop. I must have had some sort of syntax error because it still wouldn't work.
Yeah, so you could do a while loop would be a little quicker, but you could use a for loop. So for I is less than array dot length I plus plus. You can, but it's kind of unnecessary because you're just gonna do array dot pop. So you don't even need any of these indexes.
So that's all you use, just array.pop, and that'll pop all those values out.
Because you need to pop 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
You say pop once, the array's 1, 2.
Oh,
Pop
okay.
another time, the array's 1. Pop another time, the array's an empty array now. That's still pointing at the same place in memory though. So that's why a while loop would be just quicker, because while array.length does not equal to 0, or let's be specific. Technically, you could just do this because once this hits 0, this will be false. So if you say while array.length, that means while the array length is greater than 0 implicitly. But because once array.length becomes 0, this while loop will break out. And so we could say while array.length, but just to be clear, we can say while array.length is greater than 0, we can just do array.pop. And like, let's see what this does. So right now, what's the array.length when you first run through this? Yeah, it's 3. And then so we do array.pop. And so now what's array after the array.pop, the first array.pop? The actual array, like what does it look like?
Bracket 1, 2.
Yeah. And then what's the length? Yeah. So it'll go in again because 2 is greater than 0. Array.pop again, second time. What does the array look like?
1.
Yep. And then what's the length? So it's still greater. So it'll go one more time. And finally, what's this array?
Empty.
Yep. And then this is false, so it breaks out. And so now we have a clean array. Like, it's nice to work with just clean arrays, 0. I mean, there's nothing in here. Now we can just push things in. Because once you have stuff in here already, if you like push, if you pop, then like everything gets like shuffled around. Like if you unshift, I mean, because let's see if you can push. Yeah, I think you can just push all these in at once. But let's say you were using things like unshift, like pushing stuff to the front, like adding something to the front instead of to the back. Then when you add something to the front, everything shifts over. So that's why it's nice to have an empty array, because if you have stuff in here and you start trying to do these methods to it, like all these numbers shift around and it's just a lot to deal with. So here we can say, so now what do we do? Array's empty. So how do we replace this with this array? We could do another while loop, but yeah, we could do a while loop. So what would be in here? Oh.
I was
What all options
thinking
do
like
you
we could like.
Huh?
What all options do you have in this case?
You can use a while loop, and then
I was thinking like while like similar to array.length, I was thinking like I don't know, maybe keep element to keep less or dot length less than 0,
I like that.
and then you go down, you would pop elements to keep dot pop, but you would store into a variable fine.
So yeah, so that makes a lot of sense. I like this idea, but the problem is if you pop, then you're kind of reversing it. If you pop and you push, then it becomes 3.
Then
And
you
if you
shift.
pop, yeah.
You shift
No,
it.
pop shift. Pop, and choose pop and shift. Pop and shift.
You can't just.
Oh yeah, yeah. You could do pop unshift.
Yeah.
You could do pop unshift too.
Okay.
So yeah, that makes sense. Pop this and then add it to the beginning, and then pop this and then add it to the beginning. Push this over. Yeah. So you could do that too. So yeah, let's go with that. So we can just do. So what would I code into here? In this while loop.
Couldn't you do it all up under the same while loop then? You're doing it that way? The way that she's saying to do it? Can't you pop and then push up under the same while loop?
Yeah, I think you can. So that makes. Let's try that. It's a good.
Push but pop and then shift.
So what would you do here?
Like, so after that, you just do.
Oh no, you can't.
No.
You can't because you need this array. You need this array to be empty because otherwise,
It's for it to stop.
because you're gonna add things in, so it's gonna be a forever loop because you're gonna add things,
Okay.
remove one thing, add one thing, remove one thing, add one thing, and then this condition will never break. So you actually need to keep it in a separate loop. But that's a good idea.
Oh.
I didn't think of that, so that's a good idea. But what would you do here now? Uh huh.
And then what's that?
Yeah.
Pop.
Perfect. And now here you want to return elements or removed elements.
Wait, why is the condition elements to keep that pop again?
This isn't a condition. This is what we're actually pushing to the array. So let's see what's happening here. So here, let's see what's happening. So now array equals 3 because we popped elements to keep off, and that means that elements to keep is gonna be, what's elements to keep right now after you pop? Yeah, 1 in apples. And then array is going to be 3 because you've unshifted to that same array and you've popped at the same time. And so that's the first iteration. The second cycle, what would elements to keep be after you popped off it again? Yeah, just 1. And then what would array be? Yeah. And then finally,
So,
yeah.
So array is an empty string when you finish the first while loop. When does array become 3?
Because right now it's empty, right?
Yeah.
When you
before
first do it, it's empty. So you did unshift the last element of elements to keep, which is 3. So you pop 3 off, and then you add it to array in the same line. Yeah, it's confusing. Don't get me wrong. Like that's why mutating. I like to just make a new array and just like. But
elements to keep is 1 apples 3, and so then you're.
yeah, I'm failing all the tests. So let's see. Items to add.
Try look at the function.
We may have changed variable names at some point.
Yeah.
So you start with ARR or something.
So it says items to add is not defined. So right now I had item to add, but I'll add this.
Is this how the actual splice looks like?
Something like that. It's something similar to that. Item to add is not defined, so line 18. Oh, thank you. All right, so I'm pretty sure this has something to do with like my indexes. So what I'm gonna do right now is I'm gonna basically make sure that all my things are what I expect, and this is a good exercise of debugging because 80% of the time you're gonna fail the test initially. So let's like throw some logs in here. So I want to see what my elements to keep is. Let's just make sure, you know, that it looks right. So here I'm gonna open up my console, run it, and you should be able to do this in the thingy. So I don't know what these damn test specs are. Let's see.
Do you happen to change your view so we can also see
Like how
on change view on the top right? Like if you do on the bottom,
this one?
yeah, either one. So then we can see the console login like the.
Okay. Cool. So there's a lot of test cases here. Food undefined. So this first one, I'm just gonna focus on this first one here. It shouldn't be undefined. It should just be food. So I think my indexes are messed up because right here I should have, the first thing I want to do is add everything up to this point, right? So I should have food, but right now I have food and undefined. So let me see here. If items to add is not equal undefined, push items to add. So if there's a lot of tests and it's kind of confusing because there's a bunch of console logs, I would even comment out the tests that are like confusing and then just focus on one test to make it pass. So let me try to clear my console, run this again. I don't even need this. I don't even want this first one. All right, it's food and it's undefined. I don't know why I'm getting that undefined. Let's see. So, I need to push the array at I. I don't know why I had this, but this is basically saying from everything after I deleted the thing till the end of the array length, I should be pushing the array at this index. So yeah, let me try that. Nice. So let's add some more test cases back. There it is. So sometimes it helps to console log your intermediate values. So a few takeaways here is to try and write pseudocode to whatever approach you decide to take. Try and document that in English. Also, if you ever need to mutate an array past like just swapping one element, because let's say you just wanted to swap one element. Like let's say you wanted to swap like 1 and 3. Like let's say you just want to swap the first element and the last element. Then you could say let first element equals r at 0, and then you could say original array at original array, or let's say last element is array like how would you get the last element of this array?
Original array bracket 2
Yeah.
or dot length.
Yeah, dot length minus 1, or you could do 2. I like this because it works for any length, but 2 still works here. And then you could say original array at 0 equals original array at 2, or this. And then you could say original array. Do you see how annoying this gets though when you try to do things in place? Like when you try to mutate things without doing this approach of just clearing everything. Let's just clear everything, start with a blank slate, and then push everything back in. If you try to do things in place, like all I'm trying to do is swap 1 and 3 so that it becomes 3, 1. But I have to do all this extra work just because if I swapped, so let's just finish this. So if I do and then original array dot length minus 1 equals yeah, original array at 0. So if you did this, oh, damn it, original array is not defined. I still kind of mess this up. So let's see. The 0 is length dot 1. And then, oh. Wait, let me see. Damn, I'm like confusing myself right now. Let's do first element is 0. And then this becomes first element. So it's a lot of work basically to swap things in place as opposed to just mutating it. It's as opposed to just popping everything off, starting with the empty array and then just push.
Question.
Yeah.
Couldn't, rather than emptying out an array, if I wanted to mutate it without making a new one, say if I know there's no null value in the array, couldn't I just push a null into, or do a a unshift of a null that would push null to the very beginning of the array, and then create a while loop that says run until array index 0 is not equal to null?
To empty the array?
Yeah. No, so like rather than like say you have 1, 2, 3 or whatever, right? And then I push null into the beginning, or is it push?
Yeah. So you're saying you want the array to be null 1, 2, 3?
Yeah. And then create either a for loop or a while loop that says run until original array bracket 0, or run until
well, it would be hard to but how would you replace this with this? Like how would you like swap elements.
So like just do a pop and a
Unshift
push.
and pop.
Yeah, like what she was saying earlier. But do a
Unshift and a pop.
yeah, and so it would keep
Oh yeah,
running.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh,
It
I
would
see.
keep running
And
until,
then so you're saying you'd have like 3, 2, 1, null.
and then when it tries to pop off the null and then push the null back in, null will equal 0, but it won't run anymore.
So then, and then at the end you just pop
Yeah.
this.
So that at the end it'll just
Yeah,
have
you could
to
do
pop
that.
it off, but it won't run.
That's
it
another
again.
yeah, that's another way to do it because this null is like a marker,
Yeah.
and then like you cut off everything at the end of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you could do that too. It's a similar idea though, like, but yeah, it's a good idea actually. You could be clever and then put this, but I think it's just a little simpler to just have something that be just blank, like an empty slate. But this definitely does work because it'll be a marker, and then when you unshift onto this array and pop from this array, then you'll have like 3.
Because the stop mark would be
You'll have 3,
original array bracket 0,
1, 2, right? That'd be the first thing.
Null. I mean, for equal to null.
Yeah, you could do that, and then have this be 2, 3. Wait, but then it would just be the same thing. Like if you're trying to, we'll go over the reverse array thing, but let's say you were trying to reverse. Yeah, I'm kind of confused. I don't want to like confuse people further, so let's just like, I mean, you could definitely do it different ways of like clever things of putting this markers in, but I would just say if you ever are asked to mutate something, try to just like shrink the original array to 0 and then try to do whatever you want to this new array. Like do whatever you want. You could push to it, you could unshift to it, it's like your own little playground, this new array, and then once you have that, like push everything back into your original array. If you need to keep that same array mutated. And so we'll go over that. So I know this one was really confusing, but we'll go over the reverse one real quick.
So basically, in order to actually make sure the original is changing,
Yeah.
you make sure
Just pop everything off.
It's cleared out. Maybe make sure it's cleared out. Maybe make sure like you don't lose it.
Yeah, just clear everything out, just pop everything out, and then just push everything back in. So for reverse array, this one's also tricky. You take an array and it wants you to reverse the array in place. And in place always means just mutating.
So it's still the same thing as before. Like you
Yeah.
array down, like you said,
You have a placeholder array.
and delete array, or not delete array.
Yeah, it would just be like this would be like your reversed array. And then you have a new array. And then how would you reverse, like if you had this array and then your regular array was 1, 2, 3, how would you reverse it using like pop and push?
It goes into like a reverse, like a loop in reverse.
Yeah, I actually like that. So we could say loop through the array in reverse and push elements into new array. Yeah, I actually like that. And then go through new array, and so we have to clear original array, go through new array, and push to original array. So how would I go do this in reverse? Yeah, you could do that too. You could do unshift and pop. I just like iterations. It's a little easier for me to picture in my head, but you could do unshift and pop. But let's just go with the Brian's approach of looping through the array in reverse. So how would I loop through the array in reverse?
Look at this. I equals to array dot length minus 1.
Perfect.
I greater than 0 and I decrement.
Yep.
And then you pretty much like have it have to you would reverse array dot push and you know what for each and like array of I, you know.
Yeah.
And if I would assume anything else, I would like do the while loop array dot length. You pop the thing. There you go. And then like array. Like while. Wait, I forgot to do array dot length greater than 0. Forgot about that part.
You don't need to do that for this case because
Oh.
this. I mean, but we'll be specific.
Oh, so it's still acting in a situation, right?
Okay.
And then while reverse array greater than 0. No, dot length greater than 0. And then similar to the question 4, you like array dot push shift. Done. Wait, you guys reverse array dot.
Yeah, I'm kind of confused by that whole thing, so I'm just gonna loop through because right now my reversed array is gonna be because I went backwards, right, and I just did 3, 2, 1. So I'm just gonna go through this and I'm just gonna push them in. Like simple, like let's keep things simple as possible.
I'm a little bit confused.
Okay, so so basically you just have to like array dot push reverse array. Okay.
Yeah.
And then you pretty much like you retain the
Yeah.
array itself.
Exactly. And I think does it return? I don't know. I'm just gonna return.
I'm sorry, I'm a little bit confused after the reverse array dot push array I. Isn't that already returning the reverse array?
This?
Yeah.
Push doesn't return anything. Push just.
Well, isn't it like pushing the new values into the reversed array?
Yeah, but then
so it becoming the reversed array already.
Yeah, but it needs to. You need to mutate the original one.
Oh, it's mutating the original, not just creating an array.
Yeah, because it says array in place, which means
okay.
in place always means like mutating it.
Oh, okay.
So. What's the error?
I think in the first for loop, I think it has to be greater than or equal to 0.
Let's see.
Yes.
Nice.
Okay,
You
yeah,
are.
you could just say,
You are
I
an
don't think
amazing.
we need the array
You have an
dot
amazing
length
eye.
one. Yeah, I don't think we need the array dot length minus 1. And yeah.
Well, we still need this. Because you start backwards.
Yeah.
So you still need that.
Oh.
Yeah.
So are there any questions on this?
Like what?
Usually, it's a good exercise to just think about mutating and in place and what ramifications your pops and pushes have on arrays. But for the most part, like no one's gonna say do this in place. Like they'll just say reverse this array or find how many and then you can like create new arrays and do things as we normally do them. Like I would be very surprised if somebody said, "Oh, do this in place," but it does happen for like higher level stuff, I guess, because they want you to be able to keep track of multiple things. So you might get some of that, but at least for full stack, no one would, or at least I haven't encountered any problems that say to do things in place. But you should be able to reverse the array if they just said reverse the array without doing the in place thing. But the in place thing does make it a little tricky. But now we know a good method of in place would be just to like just flush out your original array, because it's always good to be simple and try to explain, because your person interviewing you would also follow along better. Like you're like saying like I'm gonna flush this array out and I'm just gonna start pushing to this same array and I'm still mutating it.
So the while array dot length is greater than 0, array dot pop is emptying your array.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's emptying my
original
original
array.
array.
You could also do that first.
Well, I couldn't do that first because then I wouldn't know what to reverse.
Oh,
I would just have flushed myself and I don't know what to what elements to even reverse because it's 0. It's it's an empty array.
Oh. In this case.
But yeah, if you guys are having trouble with this stuff, I would just say just keep practicing it. Just for the most part, again, the same main concepts apply. Like because you're popping this actual array that's passed in, you're actually changing that outside value of whatever gets passed in. You're changing it because you're using these methods that mutate the array. So those are similar concepts we learned passed by reference. It's passing the reference. So once you're mutating that object, this array, you're mutating whatever gets passed in. So you're producing side effects.
So we would just say like return and about the ARR part, you're still like returning the changed array, right?
Well, you're not returning without actually saying return,
No.
but you're still changing it. You're right. Like even if I don't return this array, if I call this function reversed array, if I just call it, then this original array will be mutated. Like this original array's value will change by me just calling this function without returning anything. Yeah. So if this is the original array and I pass this original array into reverse array, even if I don't return anything, if I just did this, like forget this thing, if I just called the function, then what would original array be after I call it? Yeah, exactly. Original array will be go we here. Even if I just call this function, because I've changed the outside value. I've mutated the outside value. Because it's an array, and I've passed in the array, and then I started mutating that array, like doing push, pop, or if I were to do square bracket 0 equals something, like reassign indexes of, I'm changing this outer array to this, even without any returns, because I'm doing these pushes and these pops, and that still affects the outside array because you're passing the reference into it, into the array, into the function. You're passing the reference, which is pointing to the same place in memory.
Can you go back to the top? Okay. So what you did was you made an empty array. You pushed the reverse into the empty array. That stored, and then you emptied the original array. The while parentheses array dot length is greater than 0, popping everything off.
Yeah.
And then you pushed your array dot pushed your reverse array into the
original array. That's why I changed my original array. Because sometimes your test will fail and say, oh, like you didn't change the original array, because if you just return this, then you didn't affect this, which is a good thing. Like, which is what you actually want to do in your code. You don't want to have side effects and like, let's say you're reading code, right? Let's say you're reading the code, and then you say let original array equals this, and then you call this function, and then below this you start doing some more things. You would expect this to still be the same, you know? You wouldn't expect this to change this. And so now, let's say you think, oh, let's say R0 equals here. Like, let's say you make this assertion because you expect that it's true. Like, you don't think that you called this function, but who knows what it really did. Somebody else wrote that function, let's say, and you just called it, and then, let's say you did want it to reverse array. So you said let reversed array equals reverse array. which is a function somebody else wrote, and you're using it. And then here, you still expect your original array. You still expect the 0 to be here, but it's not, because this mutated the original array. So now you're confused because you're reading the code top down, and you're saying, okay, somebody else wrote this. Let original array equals this. Let reversed array equals reverse array original array. Okay, so now my reversed array is going to be the reversed one, but my original one should be the same, but it's not. So you wouldn't really want to do something like this because it's confusing, but it's good to understand this so that when you do see weird things happen, you'll know something's probably being mutated in a function. Are there any questions on this?
You go back down for a second.
Yeah. Right here. So what will the value of this be?
After change,
So if we were reading this, this happens, and then this happens, and then I make this assertion, what would this value be?
false.
Yeah.
Because no longer is the
Because this
it's
changed
go,
this.
It's go now, not here. So yeah.
Yeah. Are there any questions?
No,
Okay.
maybe. No.
All right, we're going to go to higher order functions. And so this is a pretty advanced topic, but it's very useful, and it has a lot of application in web development in general. Basically, a lot of web applications, this is like the core of what allows our web applications to function the way they do, and why JavaScript is the perfect language for event-driven type of functionality. So basically, we're going to learn all about functions today. And yeah, functions and how they're very similar to every other data type that we've learned so far. So they're special because they aren't special. We think that they're very different because we declare them using function, the function keyword, and they seem to be a little different than strings and numbers and objects and arrays because they run code, and they're not just, we don't think of them as just a value, but we have to start thinking of functions as just values. There's something just like a string or a number where you can pass it into another function. If you can pass name to a function my name, console log my name, and you pass in the name as a string, and then it console logs that, you could also pass a function in there as an argument. Yeah, it seems like functions are different, and they're not exactly the same, but we can treat them in terms of passing them into functions and returning them from functions as the same. So a function can return a function. A function can also take in a function as a parameter. Just like, arrays can contain other arrays, which can contain other arrays. And objects can contain other objects that can contain other objects. Functions can return functions. They can accept functions. It's very flexible. Yeah, when people say functions are first-class objects, that just means functions are very similar to other structures that we've been using, like objects, arrays, strings, numbers, booleans. You just pass them around. And this gives you a lot of flexibility. So we can push strings into arrays, but we also can push functions. So does anyone know what this will log?
It's just gonna log.
It's gonna say I am happy 3 times.
No.
No, it's an array of
This is a good guess, though. It's just going to be an array of functions because you're not calling this.
Yeah.
This is just a value. You could think of this as a string, as a number, as an object, as an array.
Array,
Happy function, happy function, function.
Yeah.
Oh, just function.
Yeah, but you can think of it as just happy function. They're just functions that haven't been called yet. They're just waiting, just hanging out.
So how come it doesn't? How come it loads in function instead of the name of the function, happy function?
I'm not sure, but you can just think of it as. I think it's just because that's the type. It's the type of the.
So would that be considered type of then? Like type of function? Just say-
I think when you do type of function though, I think it says object. I'm not sure, but we don't need to like go deep into that.
Okay.
It's just basically the point of this is just to say functions. You could just treat them very flexibly, like strings or like arrays. Just pass them into like you could push a number, you could push a string, just push a function, and it's the same thing.
So I have a question then. If I wanted to do an array of functions,
Uh-huh.
but I name the functions all different things, how would I know which function is which function in the array if it just returns function, but not the names of the function?
There's probably a property on the function that you could access, like property.name or something. I'm not sure, but you like if you were to push functions into arrays, you would likely, in all likelihood, just go through the array and just call all of them or something. Like you wouldn't want to really do like different logic based on what the function is in the array. Like, oh, like
So wait, what happened?
But what if it's like
You
or
could,
say
you
if
could.
it's like order of operations and I need to loop through a certain group of functions.
yeah,
But if I did an object and I did a for while, then it wouldn't, because then it would have the name so I could tell which functions I'm running through first.
I
you
think they
know?
have a property. Like
Yeah.
I think they have a property that you can access, like function.name or something.
Okay.
I think there's got to be a way to do that, but we can look that up. But yeah, that's a good point.
So wait, what happens if we were to say amazing array of 0? Would it just print out? Would it do the console log I am happy, or is it just still gonna say function?
Still a function because you need to call it, you need to invoke it, you need to do the parenthesis thing. So how would you call this function after you push them? How would you call happy function?
So it would be like amazing array of 0
Mhm.
parentheses.
Yeah. Exactly. So we have happy function. How would we call all the functions in the array? We kind of went over this, but we could just loop through. And then what would you do after you did this? How would you call that? Yeah. You just do element parentheses and you just called it.
You say,
Wait, so why couldn't we say amazing array of I?
I mean, you could, but it's just
so
they did an extra
we
step.
need to return element in that problem?
You don't need to return because it's not in a. This for loop is not even in a function, so
Oh.
it wouldn't really.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But if you returned the element invoked, that means you're returning the value of the called function. So you're returning the return value of this, and this doesn't have a return value, so then it would be undefined. Like your return value would be undefined because happy function doesn't return anything. So if you returned, let's say this was in a function, and then you returned element that's called, like the invoked element, then it would just be undefined. Like your value of that would be undefined because this element is happy function and it doesn't return anything. It just logs. If you returned 5, if this function was return 5, and then you said return element invoked, then what would that value be? If this returned 5, and then you called it and you returned that, yeah, it would just be 5. It's just whatever value that is returned from the function.
Isn't amazing array an array of string stuff? So how could you
Oh, it's not an array of strings because this is a function, and then you're just you're creating. These are functions.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, okay.
They would be strings if you hadn't defined happy functions previously.
Or if if happy function was a string, then it would be strings. Like if you said let happy function equals happy function string, then these would all be strings, but they're functions, so you could just call them. You could just call them like this.
So recognize it as a function because you declared a function with the same name.
Yeah.
That's the only reason.
Yeah. That's the only reason. Because it has this. And now whenever you use happy function variable, it refers to this function. So yeah, when we call this, it'll do the log. I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy. We can also pass functions into functions. So what would this log? Anybody? Mm-hmm. It would just be string.
Why wouldn't it be happy string instead of string? Oh, the value. Sorry. Okay. Sorry.
No, it's confusing, but yeah, it's type of.
Type of.
Yeah.
So it's a string.
Mm-hmm. What about this? I think so. Yeah, I think it's function. Yeah.
You didn't like use the
Function.
Because this is a function.
Which one is the? Oh, never mind. Yeah.
Logs a type of value.
Value is happy function. So happy function is a function. So type of value is happy function because you're just getting passed in.
And what happens if you put a parentheses?
Then you would log I am happy to the console. But type of, so what would type of be? If no, it wouldn't.
No. Why?
Because this is really confusing, but this doesn't return anything. It does a side effect. Basically, console log is a function. It's another function. So console log, when you call this function, it doesn't return anything. It just produces a side effect of calling a different function. And that function's job is to log something on your console. So this doesn't return anything. So when you do happy function call, then value is undefined because the value of a function that doesn't return anything is always undefined. Does that make sense? So if we called this, if we did parentheses, then type of undefined, or this would be undefined, so type of undefined, I think it's undefined, but I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure, but the value would be undefined.
Can you give it a try?
Yeah. So you log I am happy because you're calling it. So the first thing that happens, you call this function and that logs I am happy. And then you log type of value, and value is undefined because you haven't returned anything. You've simply called the function as side effect. But a lot of people think that if you log something, it returns that, but it doesn't return it. It just logs it to your console. But like if you do let value equals happy function, like what is value? Yeah, exactly. Value is undefined. Value is undefined, but you might think it returns because you're seeing it in the log, but that doesn't mean that you're returning. That doesn't mean you have this value to play with in your actual code. This is just a side effect. It calls another function that logs something to your console right here.
What's pulling up value colon?
This. I just want to.
Oh.
I just wanted to note like what the value is.
Got it.
Yeah.
So is it so while it's returning undefined,
It's still doing something. It's still calling a side effect. Now this could be like baked cookies, you know? Like console log is the same thing. It's just a function that does some side thing. Somebody else made that function and it does something, which the thing that it does is print to your console so you can see the values, but it doesn't return anything. Like what would this, if I returned 5, then what would type of value be? Yeah. Yeah, number or int. Similar thing. So you have to return, and basically this call basically just becomes 5. So it's not really higher order functions at that point because you're not passing a function in, you're passing the function's return value. So if you wanted to say logs a type is a higher order function, then you'd have to actually pass the function without calling it. Because once you call it, it's no longer a function. It's just whatever value is returned from it, which could be undefined if there's no value returned. Are there any questions? Yeah, the console log stuff is always tricky.
wait, actually,
I think we might have to wait a little bit because whenever I do this, it takes a little bit. So yeah, we've gone through this. So what would this do? Yes, it's a beautiful answer, and that's what it does, because you're passing this function in here, and you're calling it. It's under another name. It has an alias now, but it's still this function. It's just being reassigned to this variable, so it's locally available. But
okay, so happy function is the same as another function, and another function will console log I am happy.
exactly.
Do you use higher order functions a lot?
Yeah.
Could you give us like a real world example of when you have when you use a higher order function?
Yes. I'm glad you asked. So let's say you had, so I'll just exit out. This happens like all the time. So you have a website, let's say it's REPL. Like what happens when I click this? Like, well, obviously like not that much happened, but what happens if I click this? Like something has to happen, right? Code is running, but it's not running until I click that. So basically this button, let's call it David Code button. So dot on click, and then we'll pass it a function to run. So navigate, let's say we had a function navigate to David page or navigate to home page. This is like all websites are, basically. the core of websites is just you have your button on click, pass it a function to run at a later time. Like it's a bunch of event handlers. Like you have a bunch of elements on the page, and you're not gonna just start doing stuff. Well, initially you are gonna start doing stuff to show this, and then the rest of it is just waiting. It's just waiting. It's just functions that are passed into other functions that are waiting to be called. And so when you actually click this, it's gonna actually invoke this function. But until then, it's just hanging out.
So all event handlers could be used as higher order functions.
Well, they are examples of it because basically onClick is a function, and then it gets passed a function as a parameter. So yeah, that's basically like entire web pages are essentially just event handlers. And this function is a first class object, meaning it can get passed. Like this could be this is a function on this object, but normally we're used to passing numbers and strings and all that. But in this case, you would define whatever you want to happen when I click this, write all that code, and then say, get this button, on click, do this, pass it the function. It's not getting called right now. You don't want it to go there unless you click it. So you're passing it here to be called back at a later time. Does anyone have any questions? So yeah, higher order functions, very important.
So .onClick is for object?
Well, that would be like an HTML element or something, but it would be represented as an object, but it's representing like some element on your web page. But yeah, it'd be like an object because it has a property that you can access, and that property just happens to be a function.
So
that accepts another function as its argument.
Is HTML script recognized as objects, or what are they recognized as?
HTML is just different.
String?
It's just a different. I think. Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe they're strings, but recognizes strings by JavaScript, by the language, but yeah, I'm not 100% sure, but I think you can think of them as, let's just say they're strings, and then you can work with them like that. But yeah,
because they're not like mutable. Or
HTML is hypertext markup language.
it's a different thing. Like it's not the same as JavaScript.
Language. It's all the thing that writes a web page. It's full of tags, like p tags, setting up tables.
Yeah, I can show you a little example. So like here, say we have this. Say that we have this web page. Inspect it. These are HTML elements. Like all of these are just HTML elements. Then you would write this code. I mean, you would create these elements, like how it looks here with this type of syntax, and then your JavaScript is.
Because JavaScript's manipulating the HTML,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm just trying to figure out, does it manipulate them as like primitive values or as complex?
You would just like
like if I have a paragraph that I want to manipulate, does it handle it as how does it handle it?
If you wanted to
yeah, so
your paragraph, you use CSS, probably cascading style sheets in which you can apply all kinds of
yeah, for styling and stuff, you would do that. But let's say you wanted to show, like, if you click this, you want to show, like, let's say you want to show this when you click that.
Yeah.
Then you would say, if that button gets clicked, like render all this HTML, this new HTML.
Yeah,
Basically.
like Barclays City, Union, Square. Like if I'm writing the code to bring that up, is that bringing that up as?
So you just basically
Am I calling it as a value? Is am I calling
like
it as,
I don't want to get too deep into it, but it basically you could say like if this is clicked, show this HTML. Else, if it's not clicked, show this HTML.
Oh, okay.
We could just think of that, just think of it like that for now. But obviously, you can like grab HTML. You can like JavaScript can grab a particular HTML element, and you can, I believe, you can mutate it. Like you can grab an HTML element and change the text.
Oh, okay.
So you could do that, or you could just say, you know, if I click this button, show this. If I don't click that button, show this.
Oh, okay.
You know what I
So
mean?
I'm just wondering
Yeah.
if I'm like trying to set up a website or something like that. Is like how do you like when you want to call text and stuff? Are you setting it up? Are you organizing the text into like objects, arrays? Is it just sitting as like empty strings that are set to variables? Like
It's just they're just HTML elements. Like they're just like I don't want to go too deep into it, but I can quickly show you like this is, let's say this is HTML, right? This thing is just HTML element. So if there's a status, then I'm just going to show this. Else, I'm going to show this HTML. So that's basically all it is this is JavaScript, and it's saying like, oh, if the status is new, I want to show this element. If it's not new, then I want to show this. Like you could just think of it like that for now. Like I wouldn't get too deep into it though, but it's
so
just
you just copy and paste the element and say return
yeah,
parentheses.
exactly. So if I click this, then I want to show, if I click this, return this HTML.
So you don't have to like define it or anything like that. You just whatever the HTML is, you just copy paste it in.
I mean, there's many different ways though. That's like that's one way, but you could do it different ways. You'll learn there's different approaches to creating web pages. There's like, you know, and you'll learn that in the bootcamp. Yeah, but I'll just focus on JavaScript for now because HTML, CSS can be challenging, but JavaScript by far the most challenging thing. So if you were really strong in JavaScript and just JavaScript, like the HTML and CSS will come to mind. Like JavaScript is definitely the most dynamic of those three, and understanding JavaScript is the most important. So does anybody know what this would do when you say calls back with name, pass it Sadie, and then
Let's say hi Sadie and hi.
yeah.
Yeah.
It should say hi Sadie. Because we're passing this function in here, we're calling it. It's renamed callback, but it's really just says hi.
Oh yeah.
What about says bye?
Bye, Sadie.
Yep. So hi Sadie, bye Sadie. So functions, again, you just treat them the same. They're no different.
So how does calls with a name, how does it know that the argument callback is a function before you call it? Like when
Or
I'm passing two
you would
arguments
have to
in,
know that. Like this doesn't know it,
okay.
but the fact that you're calling it means like you are aware, you are conscientiously, like when you write this code, you're saying you know that this is a function, so you're gonna trust that this is gonna be a function, and you're gonna just call it because you're kind of writing it.
Okay, so if I comment out callback parentheses name,
You comment this out.
if I comment that line out, that calls with name will interpret both name and callback as two strings, so two variables.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you comment this out and then you call this, it won't do anything.
What if you enter it in into the say hi or say bye calls with Sadie5, what would happen? Undefined?
Wait, if you said Sadie, wait, can you repeat that? Sorry.
If you where the callback is would be entered in at instead of saying you entered a function that says hi. What if you entered in a value?
Oh,
Or
then
the
it would
function.
break because you can't invoke a value. So if you pass the string in here, then it would break. Like your code would just error out.
No.
Yeah.
It's a mistake on the thing.
This is a mistake?
No, on the ones we have, it says say hi, say bye instead of call back.
Oh, here?
Oh,
no, here.
The other one.
Here.
Yeah,
That still works.
it doesn't work, but it says instead of call back.
Yeah, but if you said Sadie, if you said say hi,
Say hi, say bye, so, or bye, or something like that.
Does
Oh.
the argument, does the second argument, has say bye? I'm not
It
looking
says
at
like a variable, it doesn't exist.
yeah, I mean the it could be wrong, but
So
yeah.
the variable callback doesn't matter. That could be say calls with the name
Yeah, it could
X.
it could be X, Y, Z, D.
Invoke name.
It's whatever you want to call it.
So like callback could be
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like I guess an X in algebra.
Yeah, it's a variable. It's not any different than how we've been treating it so far. You could name it whatever you want. It's up to you. The parameter, I mean. So what does this print out? Or what does this do? Yep.
yeah.
Be hello world. And again, that's because we're returning, we're not logging. If we logged, console logged, it would still console log hello world, but we're not returning anything, so it would say there would be undefined. Like result would be undefined.
Yeah. Unless you return the fucking.
What's funk? I don't get what funk is.
So add world is getting passed into calls with hello as a parameter. So add world becomes func. Since this is just a parameter, it could be called X, Y, I love coding function, or not, maybe not function because that's a keyword, but func, funky.
So calls with hello return and invoke function
Yeah. Which,
has hello as an argument.
yeah, but this is interchangeable with this, so it really just returns a string. Because once you invoke the function, it's no longer a function. It's whatever values returned from that function.
And calls with hello can return any invoke function, but because you pass add world to it on the let result line, that's what add world gets passed through there.
You could pass a function called add class, and then that says hello class. That returns string plus class, and then the result would be hello class. It's interchangeable. Like func is generic. Like it could be any function that you pass in. Yeah. Yeah. The main thing to note here is you could pass functions in as parameter. Like if this was just if calls with hello was, if this was name and that was a string and you just console log string, or you just return string, then we're all pretty like familiar with that concept. But functions are no different. Just because this isn't a string or an array or an object doesn't mean it's any different. It's still the function. It's just not being called yet. So you can pass it around. If you don't call the function, you could pass it around like a variable, like a string or any data type. You can pass it around. That's why it's so flexible, and that's why web pages are possible, is because you can have event listeners that you pass in a function that would be called at a later time on some type of trigger from the user. That's what makes everything possible, is that you could pass functions in as parameters.
So if you didn't write the code, is there a way for you to know that the parameter that you're passing function?
You would do type of.
You would have to go through each line to find the name of that function somewhere else, to see it invoked somewhere else. Or would you just be doing type of every single parameter that you have in a function to make sure that it's a function?
Yeah, you would have to say like if type of func equals func equals function. That's how you know it's a function.
That seems really time consuming.
Yeah, but you, for the most part, you just don't do that. You just know that this is going to be a function, and then you just call it.
But if you didn't write the code, you're like looking over someone else's code.
Yeah, if you didn't write the code, that's why naming is really important. So like this denotes that it's doing something, which would denote that it's like a function, as opposed to like name. Like if you call the function name, that's pretty confusing because usually that's gonna be like a string or a static variable or something that's not a function. But like if you had a function like sign in or like log out, then it's kind of you would just intuitively guess that it's a function. But you're right. That's a weakness of JavaScript is that you don't know exactly what type it is, and so you have to do those type checks if you want to be really thorough. I think other languages are more strict, but then again, there's trade-off here. Like if this was really strict, and you had to only pass it a function type, or the code breaks, that's very thorough and that's very good in my opinion. But it's more time consuming because if you ever look at like Java, like just take a look at code that is Java and you'll see a lot more. It's just a lot more complicated because everything is like typed and you have to declare what type things are. So everyone is for sure certain of the types, and so it's more safe and it's less like random. But at the same time, like it's a lot harder to pick up that language for it in the beginning, just because you have to do a lot more. Like JavaScript is cool. Like you just pass it, call it. It's very flexible. It allows you to be very flexible, but also very careless. And so there's going to be a lot of poorly written JavaScript code as opposed to like Java, which kind of like forces you to be more explicit. But then it's a trade-off because then it's just going to take you longer to write the code.
Because if you had a function that passes both values and objects, then you'd have to write it twice in Java because it's passing different types.
Or you'd have to say like function type is function. I'm not sure. I don't know Java, but I know that you have to declare what type things are before you can work with them. So you might have to say like string this, and then like
Int variable.
Yeah, int this. And that's very nice.
You have to be specific.
It's very specific, but at the same time, it could be more annoying to just write. So what does this? Does anyone know what this will do?
Say hello to each of them.
Yeah. Say hello to each of them.
Uh-huh. God, look at this. So wordy.
Any questions on this? Basically, just the same thing as before. Like you have this. You're passing in this function into this function, and this function. This is a function. It says func right here to be less confusing. So this is a function, and then you just call that function with all the elements iteratively, one by one. We can also pass anonymous functions, basically unnamed functions. So, this is the same exact thing, except I'm just not naming this function. I'm just passing it in to this other function. And if you're not going to reuse this function, if you create a function and you're not going to reuse it somewhere else, then it might make sense to just pass in a function without a name, because you're not going to use this anywhere else. And you can't use this anywhere else because it's anonymous, meaning it doesn't have a name. But it's still going to, within the body of this function, because you're passing it in as a parameter, say with name function, you're going to be able to call it with this variable name. But this anonymous function is just, it's like a shortcut. Like, you don't have to give it a name. You can just quickly, if you were pressed for time or something, you just didn't want to name it, you can do that. Yeah, it's just an anonymous. It's just, anonymous function just means that the function doesn't have a name. Therefore, you can't use it anywhere else other than wherever you're passing it in.
So that stay with name function is referring to a function.
Is this function that doesn't have a name?
So function parentheses name, that the anonymous function is referring to the above function.
No, it's just a parameter. Group is names. Function is say with names. Func. This is just a parameter. It's an argument. Yeah. But you could define the function in the argument if you wanted to, which is what this is doing.
So since say with name function has already been passed,
Yeah.
by saying function, you're implicitly asking for say with name function to run.
You're explicitly doing it. You're running it explicitly here. There's no implicit, like there's no like under the hood thing. It's just like you're defining this function here as the second parameter that this function takes in.
Okay.
And then this function becomes this function because, again, it's the same as a string or a number or a value, except this just happens to be a function.
Okay.
And you're defining it here, and you're explicitly calling it.
Okay.
But I guess it's implicitly becoming this variable name, like under the hood, because you're not assigning it or anything.
Yeah. And you're
The
not
assignment is
assigning
happening like
group to
under
name,
the hood.
but it's using group as name.
Well, it's using the element of the group as the name, because you're sending the group, it's iterating through the group,
Oh.
and then it's passing the element of the group into here. So this is this.
Well, names.I is name.
Yeah.
And group is names.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Anyone have any guesses what this will log? Yep. One of them is going to be 30. What about this one? Yep.
Yeah.
This is a function. Calc takes in 10, 20 in a function. And the plus is this. So it'll run this on 10 and 20 because you're calling the operation function. It's just like mixing, it's just like finding the trail. So like this matches with this matches with this matches with this. And so plus becomes operation function and you're calling plus just like a normal function on num1 and num2.
Yeah, I wish you could like draw lines.
Does the order that you place the parameters matter?
Yeah, it does. So if you did operation func, then that operation func would be 10. So yeah, order matters. Are there any questions? So yeah, this is all just saying that functions can be
Pass
arguments.
to be passed in
Exactly.
or passed into parameters.
So a function that's passed into another function is called a callback, which kind of makes sense because you're calling it later. You're passing it into the function and you're calling it back at a later time. So
Question.
Mhm.
Does for each kind of almost replace for loops?
no,
No.
because for each takes a function as an argument, whereas for loop it just iterates through like a set of integers or. But
Okay.
for each is a function. For each takes a function as a parameter, and also you can't. For each doesn't.
But what if it's an array of functions?
For each, you mean?
Yeah.
You can't pass in an array of functions. It has to be a function. Like you have to pass in a function. So, as you can see here, for each is an array method. It accepts a callback as its only argument. For each calls the callback for each element in the array. So it's like these are shortcut things. These are things that you can do with just a for loop. You don't need to use for each, but it's a shortcut. For each calls the callback, it passes the current element as the first argument of the callback. We'll do an example. All this is meaningless without an example. So here we're saying, this is like similar to that other example where it was like button dot on click do this on click. So bridges is an array, and that array has a parameter that is a function. For each is a function, but it takes a function as its parameter. And what this does is basically it's like under the hood, it's implicitly passing this argument, this element, as the argument for this. So log uppercase string is Brooklyn, Golden Gate, and London.
That's what I was saying. Like before, if you wanted to log uppercase that array, you'd have to create a for loop. But instead of creating a for loop, you just do bridges dot for each.
But it doesn't replace a for loop though, because let's say you wanted to iterate through a string. You can't use for each. You could turn the string into an array and then use it for each, but like
No, yeah. That's what
Yeah.
what I mean. It works like that with arrays, not for primitive values.
yeah, like it gets called off of an array, but it takes a function.
Yeah, it takes
as a
a
parameter.
function.
Yeah.
Like so, if you want to do something to each spot in an array or whatever, you don't have to loop to
Yeah.
create a function or do something to each index in an array.
Yeah.
You can
Exactly.
just do dot for each to change or manipulate the value in place of an array.
Exactly.
So
But-
like what is it for each usually used for?
If you wanted to do something to each element in a array. So like let's say you wanted to, mark a bunch of clothes as sold. So you have a function that says mark as sold, right? You have that function, and you want to call that function on each of your sold items. You have a array called let sold items equals, and it has a bunch of your sold items, and you want to have a call a function mark as sold on all of those. Then you would probably use for each. You would say sold clothes dot for each, and then just pass in log mark as sold.
So say I wanted to add an exclamation point after Brooklyn, Golden Gate, and London. I don't have to create a for loop. I can make a function that says concatenate your index
Or just say
with an exclamation point and then just call for each and then run that function and put exclamation points in each value.
If bridges was a nested array, would log uppercase have to make an array as a parameter in order for that?
Yeah.
Wait, say that again.
If bridges was a nested array, log uppercase would have to take an arrays as a parameter in order to one for each.
Whatever this function is, whatever this parameter takes, has to be what this element is. What the element is. So if this is an array, then it has to be able to handle this as an array. If this is a string, it has to be able to handle this as a string. If this is number, object.
So would you type in array or object?
As the parameter name?
Yeah.
What do you
so
mean?
Say Brooklyn was an array, and I wanted to log Brooklyn within the nest. Like, say Brooklyn was a nested array within bridges. Then I would have to do bridges dot for each log uppercase with the parameter of array.
No, you could call it whatever you want it, but it would be an array. So this could be, you could call this list. You call this collection.
Oh, okay.
It doesn't have to be this actual type. It's the same thing as a normal function where this could be any name you want to give it, and that will just become what these elements are. Yeah, so you don't have to call it by its type. I mean, these are just little extra tidbits that.
Could you do an example of a for each with something nested?
Yeah.
Like in that.
Yeah. This is just an extra thing, but basically when implicitly under the hood, it passes index as the second argument if you ever cared for that.
Wait, can you explain that?
So like, basically, this function will inject the element of the array as its first argument and the index as its second argument. It's just you have to look at the documentation. If you look at the documentation, it'll tell you that this is happening. Like, there's no way for us to know. Like, yeah, but it's just happening. Like, the language is just doing it.
I see it. I didn't see the zeros and the ones and the twos. I didn't see any signs, so I get it.
Yeah, it's just like something that is confusing because we didn't make it. We didn't make for each. But whoever made this made it so that it calls this passing the element as the first param and then the index is the second one in case you ever cared to do something with that.
So
Might be
just
useful.
running two functions at the same time.
Not two. It would just run one, but three separate times. It's running this function 3 times, but not 2 at the same time. It's passing 2 parameters, but it's not running 2 functions. So yeah, well, that's pretty much the lecture. And then I think there's a project that I'll open if I haven't already that you guys can.
It's also optional, right?
Yeah, it's optional. So I can upload that, but it's a project that's, again, it takes in a speech and then it outputs a poem. It might be cool because it's basically going to change whatever text you input into some type of poem or speech. And so I would encourage you guys, if you guys have time, to give it a go. But again, it's optional, and I would say if you're tired, like, just focus in on the lectures and the concepts more, but this could be like a cool project. Yeah, let me see what these are. This is a little too long for me right now. So you guys can take a look. but we'll do an example of for each. So let's say we had, you want to do like a nested array?
Yeah.
So let's say you had an array of, you know, let's say each of these represented like some user's friends. So like Bobby, Johnny, John, and Mark. And then you had another user's friends that are like Sunny, like Jamie, and like yet another guy that had like, you know, right? So let's say these all just represent friends of users. And then let's say you wanted to like log each friend's name or something.
Mm-hmm.
Then you'd have a function that says that log each user's friends, and that takes in friends. And then what should this, does anyone have any ideas what I should put here?
Let, for let.
Uh-huh.
Lusted.
Uh-huh.
Lit.
You're close.
Dot length.
Yeah. Dot length of what? Yeah. This. And then let's just log I'm just gonna log the friends, that element. And then how would you do this for each? Anyone have any ideas?
User dot for each
Mm-hmm.
some function. I don't know what function. But yeah, log each friend.
And what will this log?
Names.
Yep.
Bobby, John, Mark, Sunny, Jamie,
Yeah. You name each one.
I don't know. I guess the for loop is throwing me off with the for each.
Well, if you wanted an example of a nested array, then this friends would be an array. So what could I really do with that? The most only thing I could think of was just to go through it and log all of the friends.
Could you? I guess could you repeat the two uppercase example, but just make each individual value an array? How would that work? To do the two uppercase. If say your array was just Bobby, John, Paul, but Bobby, say like Brooklyn was an array, Golden Gate was an array by itself, London was an array by itself, and you wanted to do the same exact thing
As what this is doing, but these are just arrays.
Mm-hmm. Do you have to do anything different?
Well, yeah, because now they're arrays. So if this was an array, you're saying?
Yeah.
What do you think I would have to do different? Like this would, does it? Yeah. So how would I make this work? It's just an array. This thing is an array. So now you just have to deal with it however you normally deal with arrays.
Got you. So it would be string bracket 0.
Mhm.
How come you don't? Oh, okay, because you don't have to do bracket I and run through it. You still can just.
You could but if all these are the same, then that's
It isn't
repetitive. But if this was like Berlin or something, then you would have to do a for loop because now it's 2. So.
Got it. But because they all have the same index, you just pass the
Yeah, just as a shortcut.
Got it. Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah. The main point of all of this is just that functions can be passed in as arguments to other functions. When you do that, the function that is passed in as an argument can be referred to as a callback function, calling it back at a later point in time. This drives a lot of behavior for web pages because a lot of a web page is just elements that respond to a certain user behavior. So that user behavior is the event, and that event will trigger a function to be called. Because when I click this and it logged me to the different site, that's a function. It's calling a function when I click this, right? So higher order functions are everywhere, and yeah, it's basically a way to say, do this calculation or run this packet of code at some point in time down the future that will respond to some type of user interaction or some type of event. You're like saving it for later, saving it to do it later in response to something, as opposed to doing everything now, like immediately. Yeah. I know it was a long lecture, but you guys are champs for sitting through that. And we'll have some time now for you guys to take a little breather, and we'll dive into some